In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green fields and narrow, winding roads, lived Marcus Johnson and his son Elijah. The town was picturesque, with its charming old houses and friendly neighbors who always waved hello. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting lay subtle tensions that often went unnoticed by those who didn't look too closely. For Marcus, a single father working long hours at the local factory, life wasn't easy. But it was meaningful because of one reason: Elijah. Elijah was an energetic 8-year-old boy with bright eyes full of curiosity and a heart eager to explore the world. He loved asking questions about how things worked, why the sky turned orange at sunset, why birds could fly but humans couldn't, and what made plants grow. His favorite subject, however, was science. Every evening after dinner, he would sit cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through his worn-out encyclopedia or building makeshift experiments with items he found around the house. One day, "I'm going to be a doctor," he'd declare proudly to his dad, holding up a toy stethoscope. Marcus would chuckle, ruffling his son's curly hair, and say, "I believe you will." Marcus did everything he could to give Elijah a good life. Despite working 2 jobs, he made sure to carve out time for his son, playing catch in the backyard, helping him with homework, or simply sitting together under the stars talking about their dreams. Yet there were moments when Marcus felt the weight of being different in a town where most people looked alike. Sometimes shopkeepers would glance at him suspiciously, as if questioning whether he belonged there. Other times, parents at school events would smile politely but avoid striking up conversations. It wasn't outright hostility, but the subtle hints of exclusion were enough to remind Marcus that they weren't entirely accepted. Still, Marcus chose to focus on the positives. He taught Elijah to treat everyone with kindness, regardless of how they treated him. "People are shaped by their fears and ignorance," he'd explain gently. "That doesn't mean we have to let it define us." These lessons stuck with Elijah, who grew up believing in fairness and equality, even though he didn't fully understand the complexities of the world yet. One crisp autumn afternoon, while riding his bicycle down the tree-lined street near their home, Elijah took a sharp turn too quickly. The bike wobbled, and before he could steady himself, he tumbled onto the gravel path. Pain shot through his arm as he cried out, clutching it tightly. Hearing his son scream, Marcus rushed outside. When he saw Elijah lying on the ground, tears streaming down his face, panic gripped him. "Don't move, buddy," Marcus said firmly, trying to stay calm. "Let me check." It didn't take long for Marcus to realize this wasn't just a minor scrape. Elijah's arm was swollen and bent at an unnatural angle. Knowing they needed medical attention, Marcus scooped his son into his arms and hurried to the car. As they drove toward the hospital, Elijah whimpered softly, leaning against his father's chest. "It's okay, champ," Marcus reassured him. "We'll get you fixed up real quick." Little did Marcus know, this trip to the hospital would become far more than just a routine visit. What awaited them inside those sterile white walls would test not only their strength, but also their faith in humanity. And it would change their lives forever. The hospital was bustling with activity when Marcus carried Elijah through the automatic doors. Nurses moved briskly down the hallways, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, while the faint hum of conversations and beeping machines filled the air. Marcus approached the front desk, his voice steady but urgent as he explained what had happened. "My son fell off his bike," he said. "I think his arm might be broken." The receptionist nodded and quickly paged Dr. Richard Grayson, the on-call physician for the evening. Dr. Grayson arrived a few minutes later, his tall frame striding confidently into the examination room. He was a man in his late 50s, with sharp features, silver hair neatly combed back, and an aura of authority that made people instinctively defer to him. At first glance, he seemed like the kind of doctor everyone trusted, the one who inspired confidence with just a glance. But as soon as his eyes landed on Elijah, something shifted. His expression hardened ever so slightly, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Tell me what happened," Dr. Grayson said curtly, barely glancing at Marcus. Elijah sniffled, trying to hold back tears as he recounted the fall. I was riding my bike, and then I lost control, he stammered, wincing as his words jostled his injured arm. Marcus stepped in, gently explaining how they'd rushed over because Elijah's arm looked badly hurt. It's swollen, and it doesn't seem right, Marcus added, hoping the doctor would take them seriously. But instead of examining Elijah carefully, Dr. Grayson barely touched the boy's arm. He gave it a cursory look, frowning as though annoyed by the inconvenience. It's probably just a bruise, he muttered dismissively, turning away to jot something down on his clipboard. Marcus blinked, taken aback. A bruise? Sir, his arm is bent at an odd angle. Shouldn't we get an X-ray to be sure? He asked, his tone polite but firm. Dr. Grayson paused, his pen hovering midair. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, without looking up, he replied coldly, "An X-ray isn't necessary. Trust me, I've seen plenty of cases like this. You're wasting time and resources." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something about the way Dr. Grayson spoke, his clipped tone, his refusal to even consider Elijah's pain, felt wrong. Determined not to back down, Marcus pressed further. "With all due respect, Doctor, I really think we should rule out a fracture. My son is in a lot of pain here." That's when Dr. Grayson snapped. He set the clipboard down with a loud clatter and turned to face Marcus, his lips curled into a sneer. "Listen," he said, his voice low but laced with venom. "You don't need to tell me how to do my job. People like you always come in here expecting special treatment, but I'm not going to waste hospital resources on someone who clearly doesn't belong here." The room went silent. Marcus froze, his mind struggling to process what had just been said. "People like you." The words echoed in his head, sharp and cutting. Elijah, sensing the tension, clung tighter to his father, his wide eyes darting between the two men. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm for his son's sake. "Dr. Grayson," he began, his voice trembling with restraint, "this has nothing to do with race. This is about my son getting the care he needs. If you won't help us, then please let someone else see him." But Dr. Grayson wasn't listening. With a final glare, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Marcus and Elijah sitting there, stunned and helpless. The weight of the rejection settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. How could someone sworn to heal deliberately turn away a child in pain? And why did it feel like this decision had less to do with medicine and more to do with prejudice? For a long moment, Marcus sat motionless, holding Elijah close. The boy's quiet sobs broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. They couldn't stay here, not now. Gritting his teeth, Marcus stood up, scooping Elijah into his arms once again. "We're leaving," he whispered, his voice thick with determination. "We'll find someone who actually cares." As they walked out of the hospital, Marcus couldn't shake the anger simmering inside him. This wasn't just about Elijah's injury anymore. It was about standing up against the injustice they had faced. Little did he know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would change not only their lives, but also the lives of many others in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The drive away from the hospital was tense and heavy with unspoken emotions. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as he navigated the darkening streets. Elijah sat quietly in the passenger seat, cradling his injured arm and trying to stifle his tears. The pain in his arm was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. He had never seen his dad so angry before, or so hurt. For a child who believed everyone deserved kindness, Dr. Grayson's cruelty felt like a betrayal of everything good in the world. Marcus's mind raced as he drove toward another hospital farther from town. He replayed the scene in the examination room over and over again, each word from Dr. Grayson cutting deeper than the last. "People like you." Those 3 words echoed relentlessly, igniting a fire inside him that refused to die down. It wasn't just about being turned away. It was about the blatant disregard for Elijah's humanity. How could someone whose job was to heal treat them with such contempt? As they arrived at the second hospital, Marcus pushed aside his anger and focused on getting Elijah the care he needed. This time, they were greeted by a kind nurse named Clara, who immediately noticed the swelling in Elijah's arm. She assured them that a doctor would see them soon, her warm smile putting both father and son slightly at ease. When the new doctor, a young woman named Dr. Patel, entered the room, she wasted no time examining Elijah thoroughly. After ordering an X-ray, she confirmed what Marcus had suspected all along. Elijah's arm was fractured and would need a cast. While Elijah endured the procedure, Marcus sat in the waiting area, his thoughts swirling. He couldn't shake the image of Dr. Grayson's cold, dismissive face, or the way he had spoken to them, as if they were less than human. But more than anger, Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility. What if this happened to another family? What if someone else walked into that hospital expecting help, but instead faced discrimination? The thought made his stomach churn. That's when an idea began to take shape in his mind. Marcus had always been a man of action, not one to sit idly by while injustice unfolded. Over the years, he'd learned to pick his battles, knowing when to let things slide for the sake of peace. But this time was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about protecting his son and ensuring that no other child had to endure what Elijah had gone through. By the time Elijah emerged from the treatment room with a bright blue cast wrapped snugly around his arm, Marcus had made up his mind. As they drove home under the glow of streetlights, he turned to his son and said, "Elijah, I want you to know something. What happened today wasn't fair, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. But we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Elijah looked up at his dad, his big brown eyes filled with trust and admiration. "How?" he asked softly. Marcus smiled, though his expression was tinged with resolve. "We'll figure it out together," he replied. "But first, I need to find out if Dr. Grayson has done this to anyone else. If he has, people deserve to know the truth." Back home, Marcus started digging. He spent hours online, searching for any information about Dr. Grayson. At first, he didn't find much, just glowing reviews and articles praising the doctor's work. But then, late into the night, he stumbled upon a forum where patients shared their experiences with local healthcare providers. Scrolling through the comments, he found a few posts from people who claimed they'd been treated poorly by Dr. Grayson. Some mentioned feeling ignored during appointments, while others described outright hostility based on their race or background. Realizing he needed help to uncover the full story, Marcus reached out to Sarah Collins, an old friend from high school who now worked as a journalist. Though they hadn't spoken in years, Sarah agreed to meet him after hearing his concerns. Over coffee the next day, Marcus recounted every detail of their encounter with Dr. Grayson, showing her screenshots of the forum posts and sharing his plan to expose the truth. Sarah listened intently, nodding as she scribbled notes. "This is big, Marcus," she said finally. "If we can gather enough evidence, we might be able to shine a light on this, not just for your sake, but for everyone who's been mistreated." For the first time since leaving the hospital, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't stay silent. Dr. Grayson had underestimated the quiet strength of a father determined to protect his child. And soon, the entire town would learn exactly what that meant. With Sarah's help, Marcus dove headfirst into uncovering the truth about Dr. Richard Grayson. It wasn't an easy task, digging through records, reaching out to former patients, and piecing together a puzzle that had been deliberately hidden for years. But Marcus was driven by something stronger than fear or doubt: the need to protect his son and ensure no one else suffered because of prejudice. Sarah began her investigation by filing formal requests for public records related to complaints against Dr. Grayson. Hospitals weren't required to disclose everything, but there were enough breadcrumbs in patient feedback forms and internal reviews to paint a troubling picture. What they found shocked even Marcus. Over the past decade, At least 5 families had lodged formal grievances against the doctor, accusing him of discriminatory behavior during treatment. Some claimed he refused to listen to their concerns, while others alleged he made derogatory remarks about their backgrounds. Yet each complaint had been dismissed as unsubstantiated or resolved internally, allowing Dr. Grayson to continue practicing without consequence. As Sarah dug deeper, she discovered another disturbing detail. Dr. Grayson had recently received a prestigious humanitarian award from a national medical association. The irony was staggering. A man accused of mistreating patients based on race was being celebrated for compassion and excellence in healthcare. When Marcus saw the photo of Dr. Grayson smiling confidently at the award ceremony, holding a trophy engraved with words like dedication and service, it fueled his resolve even more. "He doesn't deserve this," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Not after what he's done." To gather first-hand accounts, Sarah reached out to some of the individuals who had filed complaints. Many were hesitant to speak at first, fearing retaliation or disbelief. But when Marcus shared his own story, it opened doors. One woman, Maria Rodriguez, recounted how Dr. Grayson had mocked her limited English during a routine checkup, making her feel small and unworthy of care. Another man, James Carter, described how the doctor ignored his symptoms entirely, dismissing them as probably nothing serious, until a second opinion revealed a life-threatening condition. Each story added weight to their case, but Marcus knew they needed concrete evidence to expose Dr. Grayson publicly. That's when Sarah suggested attending the upcoming award ceremony, where the doctor would be honored again for his so-called contributions to medicine. The event would bring together influential figures from across the region, including media outlets and hospital executives. If they could confront Dr. Grayson there, in front of everyone, the truth would be impossible to ignore. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Sarah worked tirelessly to compile all the information they had gathered. They created a folder filled with documents, screenshots, and testimonies, ensuring every piece of evidence was organized and ready to present. Sarah also set up a live stream plan, knowing the impact of real-time exposure in today's digital age. "We're not just doing this for us," Marcus reminded himself often. "We're doing this for every person who's ever felt invisible because of someone like him." At home, Elijah watched his father work late into the night, poring over papers and talking animatedly with Sarah. Though still recovering from his injury, Elijah sensed the importance of what his dad was trying to do. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table reviewing notes, Elijah approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he said softly, "are you scared?" Marcus looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, putting down his pen, he pulled his son onto his lap. "Yes, buddy, I am," he admitted honestly. "Standing up to people like Dr. Grayson isn't easy, but sometimes we have to face our fears to make things right. Do you remember what I told you about fairness?" Elijah nodded. "That fairness means treating everyone the same, no matter what they look like or where they come from." "That's right," Marcus said, smiling proudly. "And that's why we're doing this, to show people that fairness matters, and that silence only lets bad things keep happening." The night before the ceremony, Marcus rehearsed what he would say. He practiced in front of the mirror, pacing back and forth as he imagined confronting Dr. Grayson. His heart pounded at the thought of standing in front of hundreds of strangers, but he pushed through the nerves. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Every word he spoke would carry the voices of those who had been silenced. Every step he took would honor the courage it took to stand up. By the time morning arrived, Marcus felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. The day of the award ceremony arrived, and Marcus woke up with a knot in his stomach. The morning air felt heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. He dressed carefully, choosing a sharp navy blue suit that made him look both professional and determined. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he caught sight of Elijah standing behind him, clutching his stuffed bear tightly. "You're gonna do great, Dad," Elijah said, his voice small but steady. "Just like we practiced." Marcus turned and knelt down to meet his son's gaze. "Thank you, champ. Remember, no matter what happens today, we're doing this for the right reasons. That's all that matters." He ruffled Elijah's hair gently before heading out, the folder filled with evidence tucked securely under his arm. The venue for the ceremony was a grand banquet hall adorned with glittering chandeliers and rows of neatly arranged chairs. Guests mingled in elegant attire, sipping champagne and exchanging polite conversation. Marcus scanned the room as he entered, his eyes landing on Dr. Grayson almost immediately. The doctor stood near the stage, laughing loudly with colleagues, completely unaware of the storm about to break over him. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt. What if no one believed him? What if they dismissed his claims as exaggerations or lies? But then he remembered the faces of Maria, James, and others who had shared their stories. Their voices gave him strength. Sarah arrived shortly after, carrying her laptop and camera equipment. She had already set up a live stream online, ensuring that anyone unable to attend could still witness the truth coming to light. "Ready?" she whispered as she took her seat near the back of the room. Marcus nodded, though his hands trembled slightly around the folder. When the lights dimmed and the host stepped onto the stage to begin the program, Marcus's heart raced. One by one, awards were handed out to various doctors and nurses. Each recipient met with applause. Finally, it was time for Dr. Grayson's moment. As his name was announced, the crowd erupted into cheers, oblivious to the tension building in the corner where Marcus sat. Dr. Grayson strode confidently to the podium, accepting the award with a self-satisfied grin. He began his acceptance speech, praising himself for his years of dedication and unwavering commitment to patients. Marcus clenched his jaw, gripping the edge of his chair. It was now or never. Before Dr. Grayson could finish, Marcus stood up, his presence commanding attention. The room fell silent as heads turned toward him. Holding the folder aloft, he addressed the audience in a clear, steady voice. "Excuse me, everyone. Before Dr. Grayson continues, I need to share something important. This man may be receiving an award tonight, but many of us know the truth. He doesn't deserve it." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Marcus stepped into the aisle, walking steadily toward the stage. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Reaching the front, he opened the folder and began reading aloud from the documents inside. "This is Maria Rodriguez, whose concerns were mocked because of her accent. This is James Carter, whose symptoms were ignored until it nearly cost him his life. And this," he paused, his voice thickening with emotion, "is my son, Elijah Johnson, whose broken arm went untreated because Dr. Grayson refused to help someone who didn't look like him." Gasps echoed through the room as Sarah projected images of the testimonies and records onto a large screen behind the stage. Faces of shocked attendees stared back at Marcus, some horrified, others disbelieving. Dr. Grayson's smile faltered, replaced by a look of panic. He tried to interrupt, stammering excuses, but Marcus raised his voice, refusing to let him derail the moment. "These aren't isolated incidents. These are patterns of behavior that have been swept under the rug for too long. Tonight, we're exposing the truth, not just for ourselves, but for every patient who deserves better." As the live stream reached thousands of viewers across social media platforms, hashtags like #JusticeForPatients and #ExposeTheTruth began trending instantly. Journalists in the audience scrambled to document the unfolding drama, while hospital executives exchanged uneasy glances. By the time Marcus finished speaking, the room was electric with outrage and hope. People approached him afterward, shaking his hand and thanking him for having the courage to speak out. Back home later that night, Elijah hugged his dad tightly. "You did it, Dad," he said, beaming with pride. Marcus smiled, though exhaustion weighed heavily on him. They had taken the first step toward change, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout from Marcus's bold move at the award ceremony was swift and far-reaching. Within hours, the video of his confrontation with Dr. Grayson had gone viral, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by major news outlets. Headlines blared phrases like "Father exposes racist doctor during award ceremony" and "Hidden truths in healthcare. A father's fight for justice." The story resonated deeply with people, not just in their small town but across the country. Countless viewers left comments expressing outrage, sharing their own experiences of discrimination in healthcare, and praising Marcus for standing up when so many others had stayed silent. Dr. Grayson, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. As soon as the initial shock wore off, he attempted to defend himself during a hastily arranged press conference. Standing before a crowd of reporters, he dismissed Marcus's accusations as misinterpretations and personal vendettas, insisting that his actions were always guided by medical judgment rather than prejudice. But his attempts to downplay the situation only made things worse. Clips of his past behavior surfaced online, recordings of dismissive remarks, photos of him ignoring patients of color, even whispers from former colleagues who corroborated the claims against him. The more he tried to deny it, the clearer it became that his reputation was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. Meanwhile, the hospital where Dr. Grayson worked launched an internal investigation, pressured by public outcry and threats of lawsuits. Executives who had once turned a blind eye to complaints about the doctor were now scrambling to distance themselves from him. Documents revealed that several formal grievances had been swept under the rug over the years, often settled quietly with payouts to avoid bad publicity. When this information came to light, it sparked a wave of anger not just toward Dr. Grayson, but also toward the institution that had allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. For Marcus, the days following the ceremony were a whirlwind of interviews, phone calls, and messages from strangers offering support. Some thanked him for giving them the courage to speak out about similar injustices they'd faced. Others simply expressed gratitude for shining a light on an issue that had long been ignored. Despite the overwhelming response, Marcus remained grounded, focusing on the bigger picture. "This isn't about me," he told anyone who asked. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did." Elijah, too, became part of the narrative in a way neither of them had expected. His bright blue cast, still wrapped snugly around his arm, became a symbol of resilience and hope. During one interview, when asked how he felt about everything happening, Elijah looked directly into the camera and said, "I don't want other kids to feel scared or hurt because someone doesn't like them. My dad showed me that being brave can make things better." His words touched hearts worldwide, turning the young boy into an accidental advocate for fairness and equality. As the investigations continued, Dr. Grayson's career unraveled completely. Stripped of his privileges at the hospital, his awards revoked, and his name tarnished beyond repair, he disappeared from the public eye. Rumors swirled that he had fled town, unable to face the consequences of his actions. While some felt a pang of sympathy for the man's fall from grace, most agreed that justice had finally been served. In the midst of all the chaos, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey they'd taken. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, when fear threatened to overwhelm him. But every step had been worth it. He realized that standing up for what was right wasn't just about confronting wrongdoing. It was about creating space for change. People were talking openly about systemic racism in healthcare now, demanding accountability and reform. Hospitals nationwide began reviewing their policies, vowing to do better. One evening, as Marcus tucked Elijah into bed, the boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "Do you think we really made a difference, Dad?" he asked softly. Marcus smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. "Yeah, buddy, I think we did. Sometimes it takes just one person to start something big. And if enough people care, real change can happen." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, then yawned. "Good night, Dad," he murmured, closing his eyes. "Good night, champ," Marcus whispered, lingering for a moment to watch his son sleep. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. They had fought hard, not just for themselves, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And though the road ahead would still have challenges, Marcus knew they had planted seeds of hope that would grow stronger with time. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself at the center of a movement he hadn't anticipated. The exposure of Dr. Grayson's misconduct sparked a nationwide conversation about bias and inequality in healthcare systems. Town hall meetings were organized, not just locally but in cities across the country, where patients shared their stories of mistreatment based on race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Advocacy groups reached out to Marcus, asking him to speak at rallies and conferences. At first, he hesitated. This level of attention was overwhelming, but he soon realized his voice carried weight, especially when paired with Elijah's story. One particularly memorable event took place in the town's community center, packed with residents eager to discuss how they could push for change. Marcus stood at the podium, gripping its edges as he addressed the crowd. "What happened to my son wasn't an isolated incident," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a reflection of a system that has failed too many people. We can't fix everything overnight, but we can start by holding those in power accountable and by listening to the voices that have been ignored for far too long." The room erupted into applause, and several attendees stepped forward afterward to share their own experiences. A young woman recounted being dismissed by emergency room staff because she didn't look sick enough. An elderly man described how language barriers had left him feeling invisible during critical treatments. Each story added fuel to the growing demand for reform, and Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. He was part of something much bigger. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to inspire those around him. His bright blue cast became a canvas for messages of hope and resilience. Friends, classmates, and even strangers wrote encouraging notes on it. "Stay strong. You're a hero. Fairness for all." The boy embraced his role as a symbol of courage, often speaking up in school discussions about kindness and equality. One day, his teacher asked the class to write essays about someone who made a difference in their lives. Elijah proudly wrote about his dad, describing how Marcus taught him to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it might be. Back home, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work, partnering with organizations focused on improving patient rights and addressing systemic racism in healthcare. He collaborated with Sarah to create educational materials for hospitals and clinics, emphasizing the importance of cultural sensitivity training for medical professionals. Together, they also drafted petitions calling for stricter accountability measures within healthcare institutions. These efforts gained traction quickly, drawing support from influential figures in medicine and politics alike. While the victories were rewarding, Marcus knew the fight was far from over. There were still moments of frustration, bureaucratic roadblocks, skeptical administrators, and pockets of resistance from individuals unwilling to acknowledge the problem. But every setback only strengthened his resolve. He reminded himself daily why he had started this journey. For Elijah, for Maria and James, and for countless others whose voices deserved to be heard. As the months passed, the Johnson family began to settle into a new rhythm. Though their lives had changed dramatically, the bond between father and son remained unshaken. They spent weekends volunteering at local shelters, teaching kids about science and fairness through fun experiments. Elijah loved these outings, always eager to explain how his dad had stood up to a mean doctor and helped make things better. His innocence and optimism brought light to even the darkest days. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Elijah turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he said, "do you think Dr. Grayson feels bad about what he did?" Marcus paused, considering the question carefully. "I don't know, buddy," he admitted. "Maybe someday he'll understand the harm he caused and try to do better. But whether he does or not, we've already done our part. We showed people that standing up for what's right matters." Elijah nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. As he leaned against his father's shoulder, Marcus looked up at the night sky, feeling a quiet sense of pride. They had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger for it. Their actions had ignited a spark of change, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, courage and determination could pave the way for a brighter future. And though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they served as testaments to the strength it took to heal and rebuild. Months had passed since the night Marcus stood up to Dr. Grayson, and life in the small town had begun to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Conversations that were once avoided, about race, privilege, and fairness, were now happening openly at dinner tables, in classrooms, and during community meetings. The ripple effect of Marcus's courage had reached far beyond his immediate circle, inspiring others to confront injustices they had long ignored or accepted as inevitable. For Marcus and Elijah, this new chapter was filled with hope, purpose, and a renewed sense of belonging. Marcus continued his advocacy work, traveling to speak at conferences and workshops about patient rights and equality in healthcare. His speeches were powerful, not because of polished words, but because of their authenticity. He spoke from the heart, sharing stories of resilience and reminding audiences that real change begins with ordinary people taking extraordinary steps. "It's not about being fearless," he often said. "It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." These words resonated deeply, earning him respect and admiration from communities nationwide. At home, Elijah thrived under his father's influence. Now fully recovered from his injury, he returned to school with a newfound confidence. His classmates looked up to him, not just because of his story, but because of the kindness and fairness he practiced every day. During science fairs, he proudly displayed projects inspired by his dream of becoming a doctor who treated everyone equally. One project, titled Healing Without Bias, featured a model hospital designed around principles of inclusivity and compassion. When asked why he wanted to be a doctor, Elijah would grin and say, "So I can help people like my dad helped me." The Johnsons also became active members of local initiatives aimed at fostering unity and understanding within their community. Marcus joined forces with leaders from different backgrounds to organize events celebrating diversity, cultural festivals, storytelling nights, and mentorship programs for children. These gatherings brought people together, breaking down barriers and building connections that had once seemed impossible. Slowly but surely, the town began to feel less divided and more like a true community. Despite these positive changes, there were still challenges. Some residents resisted the push for reform, clinging to old prejudices and habits. Others dismissed Marcus's efforts as unnecessary or overly ambitious. But Marcus didn't let criticism deter him. Instead, he focused on progress, no matter how small. Every handshake, every shared smile, every act of kindness felt like a step forward. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus and Elijah visited the park where everything had started, the same spot where Elijah had fallen off his bike months earlier. Leaves crunched beneath their feet as they walked along the path, sunlight filtering through the trees. Stopping near the bench where Marcus had comforted his son that fateful day, he turned to Elijah with a thoughtful smile. "You know, champ," he said, "sometimes bad things happen so we can learn how to make them better. That fall hurt, but look at everything it led to." Elijah tilted his head, considering his father's words. "Do you mean like how we helped people see what's wrong?" "Exactly," Marcus replied, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "And now, because of what we went through, we get to help build something stronger, a world where everyone is treated fairly, no matter who they are." As they sat side by side on the bench, watching kids play and families laugh together, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had faced darkness and emerged carrying light. Their journey wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was proof that courage and love could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Years later, when Elijah finally earned his medical degree, he delivered a speech at his graduation ceremony. Standing before a sea of proud faces, he thanked his professors, mentors, and friends. But his final words were for his father. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, You taught me that fairness isn't just a word, it's a way of living. Because of you, I'll spend my life making sure no one feels invisible or unworthy of care." The audience erupted into applause, but Marcus simply smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. In that moment, he knew their fight had been worth it. Together, they had planted seeds of change that would continue to grow for generations to come. And those scars remained, reminders of battles fought. They were badges of honor, symbols of a family's unyielding commitment to justice, love, and hope.